A young man found himself reincarnated into another world, awakening an extraordinary ability called water manipulation. This skill did not merely grant him control over water, it also allowed him to tame fierce aquatic beasts, turning them into his loyal companions. However, he did not stop there. He pushed these creatures beyond their natural limits, evolving them into terrifying sea monsters. The story unfolded in a distant land where Leang stood in a daze, mesmerized by the breathtaking view of the rising sun. The golden light painted the sky, and the crisp morning air filled his lungs. It was a peaceful, surreal moment. Before he could lose himself completely in the scenery, his father's voice called out to him, snapping him back to reality. The sound, though seemingly unfamiliar at first, carried warmth and comfort. Without hesitation, he rushed to his father, determined to make the most of the day. That morning, they spent their time on the lake, checking their catch. It was an ordinary day, yet it held a simple joy, the kind he had not experienced in a long time. A crab latching onto his foot, his father nearly choking from laughter, and the playful scribbles they carved into their boat for no reason at all. It was enough to make him forget everything else. Time passed unnoticed until the sun began to set. Before heading back, they sat by the shore to enjoy the view a little longer. That was when he spotted a red carp swimming by, its scales shimmering under the fading sunlight. It was a rare sight, and without thinking twice, Leang dived into the water. The moment he hit the surface, the fish vanished, and with it, the lake was eerily empty, devoid of any signs of life. No matter how hard he tried, he could not move forward, as though something held him in place. Suddenly, his chest tightened, his limbs grew heavy, and all he could think about was hoping his father would pull him out. But the world around him dimmed, and in an instant, he woke up, except his father was no longer there. Instead, two strangers stood before him. Reality sank in. The day he had spent with his father had been nothing more than a dream. In truth, he had been captured, bound by these men. Zhang, the one he had trusted, had deceived him. Rather than guiding them as he had believed, they had only used him as bait for a water monster. It was a cruel fate, yet Leang remained calm. This was not his first life. Leang was a transmigrator from another world. A month had passed since he had arrived in this realm, taking over this body. The original owner had perished from illness, and somehow he had ended up in his place. His mother had died in childbirth, leaving him to be raised by his father alone. For years, it had just been the two of them, until 3 months ago, when his father succumbed to a respiratory disease. Now, all the emotions, grief, loneliness, and longing had become his own. He had never known what it was like to grow up with a family, yet in the past month, he had adapted to the former owner's relationships and daily life. During this time, he had also made a startling discovery. This world was anything but ordinary. It possessed extraordinary powers, where people trained their bodies and minds to surpass human limits. Those who succeeded were known as cultivators, but it was not just humans who could evolve through training. Animals could as well. Those who did became mythical beasts. As if on cue, a creature emerged from the depths of the lake. Even Zhang, a seasoned cultivator, felt his legs go weak at the sight of it. He had expected the water beast to be no longer than half a meter, but the information had been entirely wrong. When it surfaced, it easily rocked the boat, sending waves of panic through everyone on board. Still, Yang was not one to back down without a fight. He had trained for 10 years, and if the beast wished to devour them, it would have to work for it. The second the creature lunged, Yang retaliated, unleashing his most powerful attack. But the beast was colossal. Its jaws alone dwarfed him. Before he could even register what was happening, he was gone, swallowed whole like a mere snack. The impact shattered the boat into pieces, sending the remaining man into absolute panic. This was never part of the plan. He had no intention of dying here. Desperation took over, and in a last-ditch effort to save himself, he stabbed Liang's hand and threw him into the water, hoping the scent of blood would serve as a distraction. Bound by restraints, Leang sank rapidly, but he refused to surrender. He thrashed against the ropes, biting into the rough fibers. After several agonizing moments, they loosened just enough for him to break free. However, another problem arose. His oxygen was running out, and he had already sunk too deep. Darkness crept into his vision, and just as he was about to lose consciousness, a vision appeared stood before him, his father's arm reaching out. He knew it wasn't real, yet his body reacted instinctively, stretching his hand forward. To his surprise, he grasped something solid, a log, the very same one from his father's boat, the one they had carved their faces into all those years ago. A rush of emotions, gratitude, relief, and even warmth, despite the freezing water, overwhelmed him. Somehow, even in death, his father had saved him once again. But the moment was short-lived. The scent of his blood had spread, and the monster had caught it. Before he could react, sharp teeth clamped onto his leg, dragging him further into the depth. The pressure in his chest built, the light above faded completely, and he was pulled into the beast's lair. The sight before him sent a chill down his spine. Countless bodies long devoured, wrecked boats reduced to fragments, and piles of treasure glimmering like a cruel joke in the darkness. He had done everything he could to survive, but now it was clear there was no escape. With his last breath, he closed his eyes and whispered a silent apology to his father. Soon he would be joining him, but the water beast had other plans. Instead of finishing him off, it slammed him to the ground, toying with him like a predator playing with its food. Pain erupted through his body, but then something unexpected occurred. His blood, drifting through the water, seeped into the lake bed and touched something ancient, an artifact buried beneath the wreckage, a water cauldron. At that moment, an ancient being stirred. A surge of power coursed through Liang's body, foreign yet strangely familiar. The energy adapted to him, shaping itself into something he could instinctively understand. It resembled the game systems he had once played before transmigrating, and in that instant, his ability awakened: water manipulation. The change was immediate. The water surrounding Leang was no longer his enemy. It had become his domain. His wounds closed, his body strengthened, and suddenly it felt as though he was standing on solid ground. The resistance of the water seemed to vanish, leaving him to question how any of this was possible. As if in response to his thoughts, a system notification appeared, explaining everything. He had obtained a skill called water control, which granted him the ability to manipulate water currents and breathe underwater. It was a powerful skill, one that transformed the depths of the lake into his battlefield. Before Leang could fully process his newfound abilities, the beast struck again, lunging forward to devour him. But this time, Leang was no longer helpless. With a mere thought, the water twisted and surged, catching the beast mid-swim and suspending it in place. A rush of power filled him, an intoxicating sensation that made him realize he had no limits underwater. However, reality quickly set in. This power was new, and his control over it was far from perfect. The beast struggled, breaking free from his grip, and lunged again. Yet with his newfound mobility, Liang easily dodged the attack, slipping through the water as if it were second nature. Still, dodging alone wouldn't be enough. Without a weapon, Liang needed another way to defeat the beast. Just as that thought crossed his mind, the system responded. It turned out he wasn't just a simple water manipulator. He had another skill called blood domination, which allowed him to inscribe ancient runes using his own blood, forming contracts with aquatic spirit beasts. This revelation made his pulse quicken. It was exactly what he needed. In an instant, he formulated a plan. The moment the beast surged toward him again, Liang used water control to halt its movement just long enough to inscribe the necessary runes, creating a blood domination talisman. As soon as the beast broke free from his water hold, Liang weaved around its massive form and slammed the talisman onto its head. However, forming a contract was easier said than done. It became a battle of spiritual force. The beast fought back, lashing out with the intent to crush Liang's very soul. His vision darkened, his body stiffened, and for a moment, it felt as though the creature's will was overwhelming his own. But Leang had an advantage. His soul had lived twice. Drawing on its combined strength, he pushed back. His soul energy surged, overpowering the beast's resistance. In the end, he emerged victorious. The contract was sealed, and Liang floated back to the surface, breaking through the water with a deep, desperate inhale. The air filled his lungs, and for the first time since the ordeal began, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The beast emerged right after him, no longer an enemy but an ally. Its massive form loomed over the lake, its eyes locked onto Liang with newfound reverence. It had fully submitted to him. However, there was one problem. Liang couldn't exactly stroll back into the village with a gigantic water beast at his side. That would cause all kinds of trouble. Through their newly formed spiritual link, He ordered the beast to stay behind, summoning it only when needed. With that, the beast disappeared into the depths, retreating to its hidden lair, a good place to lay low. As for Leang, it was time to leave. The next day, the old man who had thrown him into the lake as bait arrived at the village, dragging along his crew and steward Jung. They weren't there to offer condolences, assuming Leang was already dead. Instead, the old man had his sights set on something else, Leang's father's fortune. In his mind, it was compensation for the botched mission. After all, their plan had failed, Xiao was dead, and someone had to pay for it. With that in mind, they marched straight to Liang's house. The moment they reached the door, they kicked it wide open, expecting an empty room. Instead, they froze. Standing right there was Leang, alive and well. For a moment, the entire group stood in stunned silence, their faces frozen in disbelief. However, the shock was short-lived. Steward Jung's expression twisted into one of pure rage, directed squarely at the old Geyer. The steward had failed to verify the facts, but it didn't matter. He was already convinced that Liang Ku was responsible for the botched mission. Someone had to take the blame, and Jung didn't hesitate to order his men to restrain Liang and teach him a harsh lesson. The death of Jiao wasn't just an inconvenience. It had cost Jung a significant amount of money. To make matters worse, the entire village was now in danger because the beast was still at large. According to Jung and his men, all of this was Liang's fault, a claim that was entirely baseless. Liang vehemently refuted the accusations, shifting the blame back onto the old man. But the old Geyer was far too cunning to be cornered so easily. Instead, the old man flipped the script, pointing out Liang's miraculous survival. How could a mere brat like him return alive unless he had been working with the beast? With that, the accusation took a darker turn. Liang was no longer just a troublemaker. He was now being labeled a monster. The old man claimed that Liang had controlled the water beast and was responsible for Jiao's death. It was an absurd accusation, but Liang was no stranger to being labeled a freak. In his previous life, Liang had been an orphan, and the other children had treated him like a bad omen, a walking misfortune. Rumors had spread that orphans were cursed or prone to stealing, and no matter what he did, the stigma had never left him. But Liang wasn't the type to roll over and accept such treatment. He had endured enough in his past life, and he refused to be pushed around in this one, especially by someone as despicable as the old Geyer, who was already missing a tooth. Liang decided then and there that he would help the old man lose a few more. Without hesitation, Liang tackled the old Geyer, shoving him back with enough force to send him stumbling. He then locked onto the nearest basin of water. If they wanted him to be a monster so badly, fine. He would show them what a real monster looked like. Water surged up his arm, twisting and coiling like a living serpent. His anger sharpened his focus, and for a moment, he was ready to take every single one of them down with him. But just as he was about to unleash his power, his childhood friend arrived, rushing in alongside the village chief. The chief's voice cut through the chaos, carrying an authority that even Steward Jung couldn't ignore. Though the chief appeared ancient, he was still an official of the dynasty, a figure of real power. This meant Jung had no choice but to comply. Before storming off, however, Jung shot the chief a venomous glare, vowing that his master, Xiao, would hear about this. The old Geyer, however, remained unfazed. He knew it was an empty threat. Even Jung's master would bow to the chief's authority. Once the confrontation had settled, Liang let out a slow breath and turned to the village chief, offering a nod of gratitude. With nothing else left to do, they left the scene. But Liang knew better. This wasn't the end. Situations like this would keep happening unless he took matters into his own hands. Determined to survive in this world, Liang made a decision. He would use his system to its fullest potential and grow stronger as quickly as possible. It was then that he noticed something strange. His water essence was increasing. At first he wasn't sure why, but then it clicked. His crocodile pet had something to do with it. Intrigued, Liang waited for nightfall before returning to the lake. Once there, he activated his spirit link to summon his water beast. When the creature finally surfaced, it was bite-sized, completely surprising Liang. Just as he was about to ask questions, the system chimed in, explaining that subdued and contracted beasts could adjust their body size at will to manage energy consumption. This made sense to Liang, but he wasn't there to admire his pet's new party trick. He wanted to uncover the source of the water essence he had sensed. Without delay, Liang commanded his small companion to lead the way. The crocodile dove into the water and Leang followed closely. The water beast guided him deeper into the lake, weaving through the murky depths until they slipped into a hidden underwater cave. The moment Leang stepped inside, his eyes widened in astonishment. Countless legendary spirit plants sprawled across the cave floor, glowing faintly with rich spiritual energy. He reached out, brushing his fingers against one, and immediately a system prompt appeared, offering him the option to absorb it. This was a loot drop Leang couldn't afford to pass up. In this world, spiritual materials and treasures absorbed extraordinary energies over time, making them incredibly valuable. Spirit plants in particular possessed unique effects depending on their properties. Rumor had it that in Gia Manor's backyard, there was a frozen pond where special vines grew at the bottom. These vines were so rare and powerful that Master Xiao used them to lure cultivators into servitude. Yet here Liang stood surrounded by a cave full of them. Absorbing these plants would undoubtedly boost his water essence exactly what he needed. Without wasting any time, Liang got to work. He gathered as many plants as he could. He briefly considered asking his beast for help, but when he glanced over, the crocodile was already bloated, having eaten a few plants itself. Seeing it floating around, clearly full and content, Liang decided to let it rest. After all, it had earned a nap for leading him to such a treasure trove. Once he had gathered everything, Liang began devouring the plants. With just one plant, his water essence increased by 1. Not only were these spirit plants incredibly beneficial, but they were also delicious, making it far too easy for him to consume them one after another. He kept eating, absorbing as much water essence as possible. The more he accumulated, the stronger his fusion with aquatic spirits would become, and the faster his aquatic beasts could evolve. There were so many plants that, for a moment, Liang felt like he had overindulged. But it was worth it. He had gained 25 water essence. Without hesitation, he invested it into his fusion with the water monkey bloodline, increasing it from 5% to 7.5%. This significant boost in power filled him with confidence. If he ever encountered those adversaries from before, he was certain he could take them on easily. However, that confrontation would have to wait. Leang had a more pressing issue. He was broke. Autumn was coming to an end, and during this season, crocodiles slowed down due to hibernation, meaning he couldn't rely on them for hunting. With time running out, Leang devised a simple plan. Exploit the crocodiles now and gather as much profit as possible before they became useless. With this in mind, he commanded his crocodile to hunt as many fish as it could. Soon, he had stacked up a huge haul, which he sold to the merchants. Unlike the hustling vendors from his previous life, the merchants in this world were far easier to negotiate with. Just like that, Liang's financial struggles were resolved. Now it was time to settle things with the old man who had tried to set him up. But before Liang could make a move, the old man played right into his hands. Apparently, the old man had been searching for Liang to apologize for their earlier misunderstanding. To show his sincerity, he invited Liang to a meal on his boat, just the two of them. Liang nearly laughed out loud at the blatant transparency of the old man's scheme. Instead of calling him out, however, Liang decided to play along. After all, this was exactly the opportunity he had been waiting for. A few hours before the meetup, the old geezer found himself in a dire situation. The steward's men had beaten him to a pulp for his failure. For the first time ever, the steward had been publicly humiliated in front of so many people, and he wasn't about to let that slide. However, killing the old man now would have been a waste. Their master Xiao still had use for him. Xiao needed specific materials to refine his pills materials that weren't easy to come by. Specifically, he needed a true orphan child. The old geezer was tasked with abducting Liang to send a clear message that they were not to be trifled with and to secure the rare material Xiao required. If he succeeded, he was promised immortality, a reward that drove him to the brink of madness. In his desperation, he even accepted a power-boosting seal, a dangerous tool that would temporarily push his strength far beyond its limits, just for this one mission. With this newfound confidence, the old man believed capturing Liang alive would be easy. However, instead of resorting to brute force, he decided to take a smarter approach: poison. His plan was simple: soup with a toxin that wouldn't kill him, but would weaken him enough to prevent resistance or screams. Unfortunately for the old man, Liang had no patience for such tricks. Instead of taking a sip, Liang chose violence. With a flick of his hand, a stream of water shot out, wrapping around the old man's head and suffocating him on the spot. The old man struggled, clawing at the invisible grip tightening around his face, but it was useless. He couldn't even scream. Then everything went black. The next thing the old man knew, he was waking up in darkness. Night had fallen, his body ached, his mind spun, and to his horror, he was tied up. Desperate, he tried to play innocent, asking Leang what he planned to do. But Leang wasn't fooled. He already had proof that the old man had been bribed. With this knowledge, Leang knew exactly what to do. He had the perfect place for people like the old man, the same spot where they had first encountered the water beast. Except this time the beast belonged to Leang. The old man, realizing the gravity of his situation, suddenly had a change of heart. He claimed he never wanted Leang to become a monster, and began apologizing profusely, promising to tell Leang everything if he spared his life. Surprisingly, Leang agreed, prompting the old man to spill the truth. He revealed that the steward wanted to abduct Leang, along with other orphans, because to the Jiao mansion they weren't people, they were materials. Specifically, they were ingredients needed to refine a celestial pill, a pill that could grant immortality. As soon as the old man finished speaking, he realized the gravity of his confession. In a desperate attempt to save himself, he claimed he was also a victim, forced into this role by the steward. But Leang didn't care. Whether forced or not, the old man knew too much, and that alone sealed his fate. No matter what excuses he made, he wasn't leaving alive. However, Leang knew this wasn't the end. The Xiao family's influence was vast, and the old man's sudden disappearance would eventually lead them straight to him. When that happened, Leang needed a way out. His only option now was to become a cultivator and fast. The quickest way to do that was to join a martial arts school. In the city of Pingyang, there were 3 prominent martial schools, but only one stood above the rest, the Yang School. It was widely known that the master of the Yang School possessed a legendary ability, the power to break gold and stone with his bare hands. This extraordinary skill and the school's formidable reputation kept it at the pinnacle of martial prowess. Leang believed that if he could join the Yang School, the Zhao family would think twice before targeting him. After all, if a member of the school were to disappear, the Yang School would not let such an offense go unnoticed. However, the main obstacle was the school's steep admission requirements. To gain entry, Leang needed at least 8 taels of silver, but he currently had only 2. Realizing he needed to earn more money quickly, he decided to return to hunting. Over the past few days, his swimming skills had improved significantly, largely thanks to his pet, which had become his sparring partner for speed training. Through this practice, Leang had developed a unique technique. By using his water control energy, he compressed water beneath his feet and released it all at once, propelling himself forward with a burst of speed. The downside was that the technique drained his energy rapidly and could only be used for short bursts. Still, it was effective for quick maneuvers. Just as Leang was preparing for another routine hunt, something unusual caught his attention. A peculiar fish glowing bright red swam into view. This was no ordinary fish. It was a spiritual fish. In this world, certain creatures could evolve under the influence of special energy, mutating into extraordinary forms. Examples included giant scorpion beetles, 2-headed razor-toothed sharks, and iron-fin whales. Spotting 2 spiritual fish right in front of him, Leang recognized this as an opportunity he couldn't afford to miss. Without hesitation, he ordered his crocodile companion to revert to its original size and chase one of the fish while he pursued the other. Using his newly developed technique, Leang quickly closed the distance. With a swift motion, he manipulated the water to create a bubble, trapping the fish and preventing it from escaping. Catching it proved surprisingly easy, and Leang felt a surge of triumph. But just as he began to celebrate, a powerful presence stirred in the depths below, signaling that greater challenges and dangers lay ahead. Leang had just placed the fish into his basket when, without warning, a massive water beast emerged from the depths. The creature swiftly wrapped itself around him and slammed him straight into the lake bed. The impact startled him, but he knew this wasn't the time to lose consciousness. Summoning his focus, Leang locked in and quickly realized he was facing the infamous 6-barbed fish, a fearsome predator known for devouring humans. To make matters worse, the beast possessed abilities eerily similar to his own. It conjured a massive water orb, preparing to launch a devastating attack. However, Liang's power far surpassed the creature's. With a swift motion, he shattered the orb before it could fully charge. This only enraged the beast further. It lashed out with its tail, but thankfully, the croc intervened just in time, intercepting the blow. Before the beast could recover, the croc unleashed a powerful move, the primary Lotus Special, slamming the creature into the ground. Seizing the opportunity, Leang stepped in, attempting to capture the beast using his blood talisman. However, the water beast's spiritual energy proved far stronger than the croc's, and things quickly took a turn for the worse. Leang's body began to spasm uncontrollably as his system crashed, flooding him with warning messages about mental overload. Despite the overwhelming strain, he refused to back down. He knew that if he failed, the beast would undoubtedly devour them both. Fueled by sheer willpower and an unyielding desire to survive, Leang pushed through the pain. In the end, his determination paid off, and he successfully subdued the creature. Much like the croc, the beast instantly shrank into a smaller, chunky form to conserve energy. Leang couldn't help but notice its round, pudgy appearance, which reminded him of a potential evolution, a tiger-head whale. Deciding that Chuni was the perfect name for the creature, Leang felt a sense of accomplishment. With the beast now under control, he turned his attention to the loot. True to form, the croc had managed to capture another spiritual fish during the chaos. Leang gave the croc a well-deserved pat on the head, feeling grateful for its assistance. To celebrate their victory, Leang decided to cook some of the fish. He also prepared a smaller spiritual fish, hoping to extract water essence from it. To his delight, the attempt was successful, yielding 18 points of water essence. The result left him ecstatic. If a small spirit fish could provide such a substantial amount, a larger one would likely yield triple that, enough to potentially break past a 10% fusion rate. Despite the temptation to use the essence immediately, Leang knew he had other priorities. He needed money to enroll in school, and that required careful planning. For now, he decided to hold back and focus on securing the funds he needed. The path ahead was challenging, but Leang was determined to succeed. Leang had just entered the Yixing market, where a massive crowd had gathered to buy goods. He had come to sell his spiritual fish, confident that this was the perfect place to attract the right customers. However, he was caught off guard by the sheer number of people packed into the marketplace, making him wonder if there was some kind of celebration happening. That's when he spotted a man holding up another spiritual fish. It didn't take long for Leang to figure out what was going on. A member of the Chen family had arrived, and he had brought his own spiritual fish to show off. That explained why the crowd was so large. Instead of feeling discouraged, Leang grew even more excited. This was the perfect opportunity. Without wasting a second, he pushed his way through the crowd, eager to see what the man had caught. Of course, Leang wasn't there just to spectate. He was a master manipulator, so the moment he got close, he made sure to use the limelight, proudly displaying the spirit fish he had caught. But to his surprise, instead of drawing excitement, the crowd reacted with confusion. His fish wasn't met with awe, but with outright rejection. People started saying it didn't look like a spiritual fish at all, just some ugly, deformed creature that only a clueless newbie would bother catching. Before he knew it, the mockery began. The crowd didn't hold back, openly laughing at him. Even Chen, the so-called expert in spirit fish, was smirking, as if he were watching a fool embarrass himself. Just then, a cultivator arrived, instantly drawing the attention of the crowd. It was Hu Qi, a respected master from the Yang martial arts school. Since Chen was standing closer, the cultivator's gaze naturally fell on the crimson bloodfish in his hands. Without hesitation, Hu Qi asked for the price. Recognizing the man's high status, Chen didn't dare throw out a number himself. Instead, he humbly let the cultivator decide what he thought was fair. With that, Hu Qi casually offered 3 taels. The moment the words left his mouth, Chen's eyes widened. This amount was far more than he had ever expected. But just as the deal was about to be finalized, Leang suddenly whipped out his own fish for the cultivator to see. The onlookers, still riding high on their mockery, thought Leang was setting himself up for further humiliation. Some even chuckled, convinced he was about to be completely shut down. However, the cultivator's reaction was the complete opposite. The moment his eyes landed on Leang's creature, he was visibly excited. He identified it as a horned pommet, a rare and highly valued spirit fish. Without hesitation, Hu Qi offered 6 taels for it. The entire market was stunned. They had been completely wrong, and the amount of money offered was more than what most families could save in generations. Now they realized who the foolish one really was, and it definitely wasn't Leang. Even Chen, who had just been basking in his own success, was left speechless. No amount of arrogance could cover the fact that Leang had outshined him completely. However, with such a large sum of money, shock quickly turned to envy. One man in the crowd even made a veiled threat against Leang, disguising it as a joke. But Leang didn't let it bother him. He simply went on with the transaction, completely unbothered by the stares. With that, Chen had no choice but to back away, knowing full well that his fish was no longer of any interest to the cultivator. But before handing over the fish, Leang, ever the opportunist, saw a chance to dig for more information. If his fish was worth double the price of a crimson blood fish, he wanted to know why. Casually, he asked Hu Qi about it. Luckily for him, the cultivator was in a good mood and didn't mind explaining. It turned out that the horned pommet was a key ingredient in medicine used to craft special pills. These pills weren't just ordinary supplements. They strengthened essence and refined energy, helping cultivators break through the blood flow barrier, a crucial stage in martial cultivation. As fate would have it, Hu Qi was currently at that exact bottleneck, making the fish extremely useful to him. With this, Leang's perspective widened. He had only been thinking about selling fish for money, but now he realized their true value in cultivation. This was huge. Grateful for the insight, he sincerely thanked the cultivator, knowing that this knowledge would serve him well in the future. A little while later, Leang sat in an alley, counting his money, when someone appeared behind him. It was Libo, his childhood friend, who had come looking for him after hearing about what had happened. Libo congratulated Leang for bringing pride to their village, something Leang definitely appreciated. Seizing the opportunity, Leang also took a moment to thank Libo for bringing the village chief when he needed help. As a friend, Libo couldn't resist teasing him, saying that if Leang was truly grateful, he should hand over the 6 taels of silver he had just earned. Obviously, Leang ignored that completely, and instead got straight to the point, asking how much it cost to enroll in the Yang martial arts school. To his surprise, Libo grew really excited, especially since his father was about to send him there as well. The school charged 7 taels of silver for basic enrollment without lodging or meals, 10 taels if those were included, and 20 taels if one wanted to add medicinal baths to their training. While it was pricier than other schools, it was also the most prestigious, making it worth the cost. Leang agreed and couldn't help but smile, realizing he could definitely afford to enroll with his current budget. With everything he had earned over the past few days, he had gathered 9 taels of silver in total. Without hesitation, he told Libo they could sign up together the next day, which excited his friend even more since the timing worked out perfectly for both of them. But just as the moment felt right, their excitement was cut short. Leang's passive ability suddenly activated, sharpening his senses in a way that sent a chill down his spine. He could overhear conversations of people nearby as long as they were close to a water source. And this time, the voices came from none other than the Shao Manor. What he heard made his stomach drop. They weren't just talking about something random. They were specifically tracking him down. This was bad. Absolutely bad. If they were already onto him, he needed to power up fast. Without wasting another moment, as soon as night fell, Leang returned to the lake. To his surprise, Chunky had managed to catch another spirit fish. Without hesitation, Leang decided to prepare it. Unlike a brute who might devour it raw, he took the time to cook it properly, seasoning it and turning it into a soup. The result was extraordinary. The flavors blended harmoniously, creating an unbelievably rich taste that filled his mouth with every spoonful. The aroma was so enticing that his pets were practically drooling, their eyes locked on the delicious meal before them. Fortunately, Leang was not one to hoard good food. He generously shared portions with his companions, ensuring everyone was satisfied. The meal was not only fulfilling, but also rewarding. The spirit fish granted him 24 water essences, a significant increase compared to the 18 essences he had gained from the horned Pimit earlier. Without delay, Leang used the essences to refine his power. As expected, the energy surging through him was far stronger than before. His fusion rate had now reached nearly 12%, filling him with an eagerness to test his newfound strength in a fight. Additionally, his water control had improved considerably. He realized he could effortlessly lift Chunky high into the air if he wished. However, as he observed his beast companion, something else caught his attention. Their evolution requirement had decreased from 800 to 779. This revelation astonished him. The only thing he had done was feed them, yet the requirement had dropped significantly. This discovery made him realize the immense value of the water cauldron, far beyond his initial expectations. It left him wondering about its origins. Was it a natural creation or the work of something greater? The answer, he believed, lay within the cauldron itself. Summoning the cauldron for a closer inspection, Leang noticed intricate carvings that piqued his curiosity. On one side was a water monkey, while the other featured a winged dragon. Other strange creatures were also depicted, including one with a human head and a snake's body, as well as a mysterious robed figure. These engravings hinted at the cauldron's true nature, but Leang knew better than to jump to conclusions. Overthinking would not serve him well at this moment. He needed to stay focused, especially since he was about to enroll in a martial arts school the following day. The next day arrived swiftly. Leang and Libo were traveling through the mountains in a carriage. While Leang was composed, Libo's boundless enthusiasm was almost overwhelming. The younger boy was practically bouncing in his seat, far too excited for the journey. Leang couldn't help but wonder if he should have made the trip alone. After some time, they arrived at Pinyang City, a bustling hub where people from various villages gathered to trade goods. The streets were packed, filled with the chatter of merchants and the enticing aroma of freshly cooked street food. The vibrant atmosphere captivated the two travelers, and they decided to take a detour to explore. They sampled different foods, admired unique handcrafted art, and even stumbled upon a bizarre display of strength, a man lying on bricks while a muscular individual hammered him with a heavy object. It was a shocking sight, to say the least. Meanwhile, as they wandered through the city, a group of men was plotting something far less innocent. They had been eyeing Liang's money for some time and had initially planned to rob him the previous day. However, after overhearing that Leang and Libo were headed to the Yang Martial Arts School, they realized there was an even greater opportunity. 2 bags of money instead of 1. The thought alone made them salivate with greed. Even if they sold their wives, they would never come close to such wealth. The temptation to take it for themselves was too great to resist. Some of the men hesitated, fearing the consequences if they were caught by the magistrate's office. However, their leader dismissed their concerns with a grin, assuring them that things would not escalate that far. He promised to take care of the bodies himself, confident that no one would ever discover their crime. The gang predicted that Leang and Libo would take the shortest route to the school, a little-used shortcut that was the perfect spot for an ambush. As expected, the two travelers eventually appeared on the path. Without wasting a second, the gang stepped out to intercept them, blocking their way with smug grins. They demanded money, giving Leang and Libo 2 options: hand it over willingly or end up buried by the roadside. The men laughed as they delivered their ultimatum, treating the situation as if it were some twisted joke. Unfortunately for them, the joke was about to backfire. Leang was not amused. Instead, he wore a devious smile as he made his decision. If they were so eager to bury someone by the roadside, he would gladly grant them their wish, but it would be their own graves they dug. They were about to face the consequences of their actions. The thugs were immediately enraged, and without hesitation, they lunged at Leang. However, Leang swiftly appeared in front of them, landing a powerful right hook before they could even complete their attack. His speed was astonishing. He noticed the second thug still mid-motion and, without missing a beat, slammed his elbow directly into the man's face. But Leang didn't stop there. Before the second thug could even hit the ground, Leang grabbed him by the hair as if he were nothing more than a rag doll and hurled him straight into their leader. The leader stood there, dumbfounded and completely unprepared for the sheer force coming from someone who appeared to be just a kid. Before he could process what was happening, Liang's fist had already connected, smashing the leader's face into the ground with such brutality that it looked as though he were planting a tree. The impact was so severe that the leader's neck bent at an unnatural angle, leaving little doubt that no ordinary person could survive such a blow. Ironically, Liang hadn't even intended to strike that hard. He was as shocked as his friend, as this was his first real fight since leveling up. It was now clear that his physical abilities, along with his waterbending powers, had skyrocketed. Seeing what had just unfolded, Liang's friend couldn't contain his curiosity. He wondered when Leang had become so strong. For as long as he had known him, Leang had never displayed such power. Did he even need a master at this point? However, since Leang wasn't ready to reveal the truth, he simply shrugged it off with the weakest excuse imaginable. Apparently, he had been a genius all along. With that, they decided to get moving as they were already running late for school. Leang's friend, of course, wasn't buying the excuse for a second. He knew Leang well enough to understand that genius was the last word anyone would use to describe him. But since Leang wasn't ready to open up, his friend decided not to push the matter and respected his decision for the time being. With that, they continued their journey to the Yang sect and soon arrived at its entrance. There, they were greeted by a senior disciple named Xiang. After exchanging formal greetings, Xiang led them inside, guiding them to another instructor who would oversee their test and explain what it meant to be a member of the sect. This brought them to Senior Hu, a direct disciple of Master Yang. Senior Hu was not the ordinary-looking man one might expect, but rather someone with luxurious hair, the same man Liang had met at the market, the one who had purchased his fish. To Liang's surprise, Senior Hu immediately recognized him, which caught Xiang off guard. Seeing Xiang's confusion, Senior Hu casually explained how he had met Liang before. This twist of fate pleased Xiang, as it meant they could skip lengthy introductions and get straight to business. With the formalities settled, it was decided that the juniors would now be under Senior Hu's guidance. For the night, they were allowed to stay in the martial hall. After thanking Xiang and formally greeting Senior Hu, the latter made it clear that he was a busy man and didn't have time to waste. Without delay, he instructed them to follow him so he could test their bone structure. This was something the boys hadn't expected, and their hesitation made Senior Hu laugh at their anxious expressions. He reassured them that there was nothing to worry about. This was simply his way of determining which cultivation path suited them best. This concept was entirely new to the boys from the province, but Liang wasn't about to remain ignorant. Seizing the opportunity, he asked Senior Hu to explain the principles behind the cultivation path he had mentioned. Fortunately, Senior Hu was a natural teacher and, without hesitation, began his explanation. He explained that martial arts were divided into 4 stages. The skin barrier, which hardened the body like oxide, making the skin tough and resilient, greatly enhancing defense. The flesh barrier, which strengthened the muscles, allowing a person to lift a grown man with one hand as if it were nothing. The bone barrier, which unleashed power even more recklessly, making it possible to shatter stone and split monuments. And finally, the blood barrier, which represented the ultimate refinement, enhancing every aspect of the body like embroidery on silk. At its core, martial cultivation boiled down to one thing: refinement. However, for ordinary people, no matter how much they refined their bodies, there was always a limit. To break past that limit, 2 things were indispensable: technique and medicine. Seeing the curiosity in his juniors' eyes, Senior Hu decided to give them an example. He brought up the Yang Martial Hall's 3-fist technique. With the right technique, a cultivator could climb upward like stepping onto a stairway to ascend. However, that path was steep and treacherous. To climb faster and more steadily, one needed a handrail, and that handrail was medicine. He mentioned the bullhorn pommet, the fish Leang had sold to him, as an example of the kind of resource cultivators needed for their refinement. At that moment, a realization dawned on Leang, one that both enlightened and delighted him. With his pets by his side, gathering such medicines wouldn't be a problem at all. He was practically set for life. Senior Hu could already tell from their expressions that their minds were racing with possibilities, likely planning how to take advantage of this newfound knowledge. However, before they got too ahead of themselves, he reminded them to take it slow. The martial path was long, and rushing would only lead to setbacks. They needed to focus on each step one at a time, a piece of advice they were grateful for. With that, they resumed the test, ready to have their bone structures examined. Meanwhile, off to the side, a troublesome group led by Yankai from the same sect had locked eyes on Leang. From the way they carried themselves, it was obvious they were lackeys of the third young master of the Jiao Manor, Suiyuan. Suiyuan had taken quite a liking to Liang, and as long as Yankai and his followers managed to get rid of him and his friend from the sect, Suiyuan had promised to grant them whatever they wanted. However, the real reason Suiyuan was so fixated on Liang wasn't just personal interest. There was more to it than met the eye. The Xiao Manor was not, in fact, producing pills to achieve immortality, at least not in the manner people assumed. Instead, they were crafting pills to heal Xiao Yuan, the younger brother of Master Xiao. Master Xiao believed that Liang was the perfect material for refining the elixir, primarily because Liang was the same age as Xiao Yuan. Since Xiao Yuan had been frail since childhood, finding a fetal pill from someone of the same age had become increasingly difficult. Liang, therefore, was the ideal candidate. However, there was a problem. Liang had joined the Yang sect, making it significantly harder to capture him. As a result, they needed to find another target, one who wouldn't be missed. Master Xiao had more or less abandoned the idea, but unfortunately, Xiao Yuan himself had overheard everything. Determined not to let some orphan children stand in his way, Xiao Yuan decided to take matters into his own hands. By handling the situation personally, he believed things would become much easier, and soon he would finally break free from his limitations and advance to his elixir aperture. Meanwhile, Liang and Libo had finished assessing their bone structures. Libo, however, was still in shock, utterly flabbergasted. The fact that Liang possessed a top-tier bone structure, while he himself only ranked at a mid-high tier, was unacceptable to him. Libo entertained the idea that the test might have been rigged, though he knew deep down that it wasn't. He had always believed that he and Liang were equals, but now it seemed as though he was merely a side character in his best friend's story. Despite his discouragement, Libo pushed those thoughts aside and pressed on. With the matter settled, the two were about to head to the training grounds when they encountered a familiar face, Chen Jie Chang, the same individual who had been selling spirit fish with Liang the other day. However, from the way Libo immediately stepped forward and began sizing him up, it was clear that Libo had a deeper history with Chang than Liang did. The animosity between them was palpable, and within seconds, the two were on the verge of fighting right then and there. Liang, realizing the potential consequences, intervened before things could escalate. If they had started throwing punches, they would have been in serious trouble. Once the tension subsided, Liang asked Chang if he was there to practice martial arts as well. Chang confirmed this, revealing that he and Liang shared the same goal. From the very beginning, Chang had been selling spirit fish to save up enough money to enter the school as soon as possible. This revelation was reassuring to Liang. The more people with the same determination, the better. Without hesitation, Liang invited Chang to join them, especially since Senior Hu was teaching at the training grounds. They couldn't afford to miss such an opportunity. With that, they joined the other members for training. However, as newcomers, the intensity of the training was far beyond anything they had anticipated. Their muscles spasmed uncontrollably, their limbs felt like jelly, and their breaths came in ragged gasps. Just when they were on the verge of collapsing, Senior Hu called for a break, sparing them from complete exhaustion. But the training wasn't over yet. Instructor Lu would be taking over in the afternoon, meaning they had only a brief moment to recover before being thrown back into the grind. At this point, Libo was already considering quitting as the pain was unbearable. Cheng, overhearing this, burst into laughter and called Libo weak-willed without hesitation. Before they could properly catch their breath, trouble arrived in the form of Yang Chai and his lackey. The duo began pestering them immediately, throwing insults and acting as though they owned the place. To make matters worse, they had the audacity to demand 100 coins from Leang and his friends as a donation, claiming that paying up would allow them to stay in the sect. This demand was utterly ridiculous, and Libo was ready to throw hands on the spot, despite knowing his skills weren't on par with theirs. He didn't care. He just wanted the satisfaction of punching at least one of them in the face. However, the more level-headed Chang stopped him, pointing out that picking a fight there would not only be reckless, but also cause unnecessary trouble for Senior Hu, which was the last thing they needed. Even Liang hesitated. He wasn't the type to back down, but with his current strength, he wasn't sure if he could handle 3 cultivators at once. Just as he feared, Yang Chai seized the moment to boast loudly, declaring that he was about to break through the skin barrier and was itching to test it out on newcomers like them. It was a fight they couldn't win. If only they had been near a river, Leang might have had a fighting chance, but in their current state, it was a losing battle from the start. Thankfully, Senior Hu returned to check on the newcomers, putting a stop to the confrontation before it could escalate further. Not only did he shut down the nonsense, but he also ensured that Yang Kai and his lackey were punished for their antics. This only fueled Yang Kai's hatred for Liang and his friends, and they hurled empty threats before finally backing down. Senior Hu, however, wasn't playing around. He made sure their punishment was severe. But things weren't as simple as they seemed. As they left, Liang overheard something through his passive skill that immediately put him on edge. Someone nearby was talking about him, and from the tone of their voice, it was clear they were still targeting him, even after he had joined the Yang sect. They sounded desperate, which was a bad sign. If they were this persistent, it meant they wouldn't hesitate to strike when he was vulnerable, and his friends could end up caught in the crossfire. Without wasting time, Liang quickly told the others he had something to take care of and would be heading home for a bit in the afternoon. He bolted out of there, planning to go to the Lotus Pond, where he would have the advantage and where there would be no witnesses to see what he was about to unleash. A short while later, as night descended, Libo and Ji Chang were leisurely walking around the sect grounds. Libo began to express concern over Liang's prolonged absence, wondering aloud why he hadn't returned yet. Ji Chang, as usual, didn't miss the opportunity to tease him, comparing his worry to that of someone missing their boyfriend. This remark instantly infuriated Libo, and the two were on the verge of another heated argument. However, before their bickering could escalate, a sudden burst of applause interrupted them, drawing their attention elsewhere. It turned out to be Yan Kai, accompanied by his crew, and it was clear he was determined to settle the unfinished business from earlier. Without hesitation, Yan Kai launched into an assault, pummeling Libo and Jie Chang as if they were mere punching bags. Yet this wasn't enough to satisfy him. His true target, Liang, was still absent. After delivering a few more blows for good measure, Yan Kai turned to Ji Chang and demanded to know Liang's whereabouts. Ji Chang, however, refused to betray his friend. Instead, he grabbed the nearest brick and hurled it directly at Yan Kai's face. Unfortunately, Yan Kai's resilience surpassed expectations. The blow didn't even faze him. If anything, it only fueled his anger. He retaliated by slamming Ji Chang's face into the ground, making it abundantly clear who held the upper hand. But Yan Kai wasn't done. Feeling particularly spiteful, he decided to take things further, knowing full well that excessive violence would likely result in punishment. Yet his impulsive thoughts prevailed. He ordered his minions to guard the gate while he dealt with the situation personally. As his followers nodded and prepared to comply, Libo attempted to fight back. However, his efforts were futile. Charging at an opponent who was smirking at him should have been a clear sign to retreat. But Libo pressed on, paying the price for his defiance. Yan Kai twisted his arm with such force that it might as well have been a lever, then slammed him to the ground, pinning him in a humiliating position. Yan Kai's focus, however, remained on Jie Chang, the one who had dared to strike him with a brick. If Ji Chang wanted to play dirty, Yan Kai was more than willing to reciprocate. This time, he wasn't just aiming to inflict pain, he intended to make it personal. He taunted Jie Chang, threatening to take one of his eyes, mocking how well he'd be able to train afterward. Meanwhile, Liang had finally returned to the lake, accompanied by his pets. Despite the calm surroundings, an unsettling feeling gnawed at him. His usually fearless companions, Lazy Croc and Chunky, both formidable creatures nearing the skin realm, had been so terrified that they had sent him a distress signal. Whatever had frightened them wasn't an ordinary beast, it was a true monster. Realizing there was no escape, Leang resolved to confront the danger head-on. Upon reaching the area where the beast had last been spotted, he found no trace of the creature itself, only the extensive destruction it had left behind. The sheer scale of the damage indicated that the beast was massive, and Leang knew he had to act quickly. To maximize his chances, he transformed his pets back into their smaller, cuter forms and activated Aqua Vision. Thanks to recent upgrades in his fusion level, his underwater perception had expanded from 1 meter to 6, allowing him to observe the seabed with remarkable clarity. This enhancement made tracking the beast significantly easier. The moment he located it, however, his expression shifted. The creature far exceeded his expectations. It was an enormous crab, its massive claws and appendages dwarfing even his combined beasts. According to Instructor Hugh, any beast surpassing the skin realm was considered a spirit beast, and this crab had clearly reached that level. Yet, Leang reasoned that it couldn't be overwhelmingly powerful. Otherwise, Lazy Croc and Chunky wouldn't have escaped alive. Still, defeating it wouldn't be a simple task, especially without proper preparation. The odds were stacked against them, and Leang briefly questioned whether engaging the beast was wise, as it wasn't part of his original plan. However, uncertainty and danger had always been constants in his life. He believed that the most pivotal moments often arose from taking risks and adapting to unforeseen challenges. The pond was his domain, and he wasn't about to let go of what was rightfully his. With determination, he decided to confront the monster. Transforming his pets back into their original forms, he prepared for battle. Even underwater, their presence was awe-inspiring, exuding an aura of power and readiness. Without hesitation, Leang and his companions charged toward the crab at full speed. But the crab wasn't idle. It was ready to defend itself, setting the stage for a fierce confrontation. The massive creature raised one of its enormous claws, gripping a boulder tightly. It crushed the boulder and hurled it toward its enemies, embedding it with mana before launching it like a barrage of high-speed projectiles. The boulders rained down with terrifying speed, completely dispersing the advancing group. Realizing the danger, Leang quickly understood that they needed to target the crab's claws first. He ordered Lazy Croc to attack, commanding the beast to sink its massive fangs into the crab's armored limb in an attempt to break it. However, it soon became apparent that the attempt had failed. The crab's shell was ridiculously durable, almost invincible, making brute force ineffective. Leang quickly adapted his strategy. Using his water manipulation abilities, he suspended the crab's other claw in place, creating a brief opening. Seizing the opportunity, he directed Chunky to rush in and attack. The beast lunged forward, chomping down on one of the crab's eyes and tearing it out. Instead of weakening the monster, however, the injury only enraged it further, sending it into a violent frenzy. Leang struggled to maintain control, using his mental energy to hold the crab down, but his energy was draining rapidly. Before he knew it, the crab broke free from his restraint and went completely berserk, flailing its claws and stomping wildly. In its rampage, it destroyed several of Liang's precious spirit plants, which infuriated him. Before Leang could react, the massive crab charged at him with surprising speed. It struck him with tremendous force, sending him flying several feet away. Despite the brutal hit, Leang refused to be knocked out. Fueled by anger and determination, he forced himself to stay conscious and got back on his feet, ready to face the creature head-on. However, he knew brute force alone wouldn't work, so he took a moment to analyze the crab, searching for any weaknesses. He noticed that the crab instinctively protected its abdomen, even while sustaining injuries elsewhere. Realizing this had to be its weak spot, Leang saw his chance to strike. Gathering every last bit of his energy, Leang compressed the surrounding water, forming rings around his spear. Each ring added a burst of acceleration, significantly increasing the spear's penetration power. However, with his energy reserves nearly depleted, he could only manage 2 rings before blood began dripping from his nose. Despite the strain, he powered through and launched his spear straight at the crab's exposed abdomen. As he had predicted, the abdomen was far softer than the rest of its body. The spear tore through the crab's flesh, piercing cleanly through to the other side. Leang was ecstatic at his success, but there was no time to celebrate. His energy reserves were completely drained, and as soon as his adrenaline faded, his body gave out. He lost consciousness on the spot. When he finally opened his eyes, he found himself no longer underwater. At first he was confused, but he soon noticed Lazy Croc and Chunky nearby, realizing they had saved him once again. Grateful for their help, he reached out and gave them both a well-deserved pat on the head. However, the after effects of overusing his powers hit him hard. His head throbbed painfully, serving as a stark reminder that he needed to be more careful in the future. As Leang tried to push himself up, something caught his eye. At first, he wasn't sure what he was looking at, but upon closer inspection, he realized it was the demonic crab they had just fought. He was surprised that his pets had brought the massive creature up with them, but he was deeply thankful. The crab's body would provide an incredible amount of water essence once consumed, and since it was a spirit beast, its meat was sure to be delicious. The mere thought made his mouth water. However, his daydreaming was interrupted when Lazy Croc pointed at something inside the crab's body. Leang approached and noticed that the crab was actually a female. Nestled within its body was a cluster of crab eggs. Excitement surged through him. He had initially regretted not taming the great crab, as it could have significantly boosted his power. But with these eggs, he still had a chance to raise one as his own. The only problem was that he couldn't wait around for them to hatch naturally. The chances of the eggs surviving on their own were slim, and he didn't have the luxury of playing babysitter. This left him with only one option: using his Blood Dominion talisman in the hope of forcing an evolution. After engraving the seal onto one of the eggs, he held his breath and waited. At first, nothing happened, and he began to think the attempt had failed. But then the egg twitched. A tiny crab claw burst through the shell, cracking it open. Moments later, the egg split apart, revealing the cutest little crab Leang had ever seen. While Chunky was adorable, this tiny crab was on another level, making him want to wrap it in a blanket and protect it at all costs. However, its appearance was deceiving. This little creature had the potential to evolve into a stone crab king, just like the one Leang had fought. Leang had cooked the giant crab and wasted no time devouring it. The crab was not only delicious, but also brimming with water essence, and its effects were almost instantaneous. His fusion rate skyrocketed from 10% to an astonishing 36.6%, a leap he hadn't thought possible. The boost was so significant that the water monkey's power within him grew even more dominant, as if the two were inching closer to becoming one. Even the water monkey's instincts and combat senses seemed to flow through him more vividly than ever before. To top it off, his wounds had completely healed. His pets watched in awe as he stood there, water spiraling around him like a newly crowned god of the sea. It was hard to blame them. Leang looked nothing short of majestic. Once he fully adjusted to the fusion, Leang couldn't help but feel exhilarated by the results. While the physical enhancements were remarkable, the surge of energy he gained was something else entirely. For the first time, he could sense his own blood energy. If Instructor Wu's teachings were correct, this meant he was dangerously close to breaking through the skin barrier, perhaps even surpassing it. However, Leang knew he wouldn't have reached this level without his pets, so he made sure to share the remaining crab meat and eggs with them. This would accelerate their evolution, making their journey easier in the long run. Besides, the meat wouldn't stay fresh forever, and each egg contained only 6 points of water essence, making them hardly worth hoarding. As for the tiny crab perched on his shoulder, which he had named Fist due to its size, Leang chose not to feed it. Letting it eat its own kind felt too cruel, even for him. Despite the power boost, Leang knew he couldn't afford to grow complacent. The threat of the Zhao Manor still loomed over him. If he could break through the skin barrier within the next month, he would officially become a Marshall Hall student, and the Zhao family would no longer be able to touch him. With this thought in mind, Leang was eager to return to the sect. Tomorrow's morning practice couldn't come soon enough. Meanwhile, on Yankai's side of things, someone had taken notice of his actions and wasn't about to let it slide. That someone was Xiao Huai, who had no intention of allowing anyone to defy the Marshall Hall's rules. However, instead of backing down, Yan Kai met Xiao Huai with a smirk, completely unfazed. Even though he was standing in front of an instructor, Yan Kai knew Xiao Huai couldn't stop him. After all, Yan Kai was acting under the direct orders of the Zhao family's third young master. He believed Xiao Huai, whom he saw as nothing more than a dog, should know his place. If Xiao Huai knew what was good for him, he would stand down, unless he wanted Yan Kai to report his interference to the master. The look on Xiao Huai's face said it all. Yan Kai and his lackey wasted no time laughing at him, mocking the fact that no matter how much Xiao Huai acted like a Yang sect disciple, everyone knew he still belonged to the Zhao manor. If the Zhao family hadn't taken in Xiao Huai and his father, he wouldn't even be in the sect. Besides, Xiao Huai's father was still living under their roof, which meant Xiao Huai had no real choice in the matter. Yan Kai knew this, and so did everyone else. Sure enough, Xiao Huai could only grit his teeth, his loyalty to the sect tested. In the end, he had no choice but to lower his head and mutter an apology. For Xiao Huai, as long as his family remained safe, he didn't care what happened to himself. Yan Kai, of course, found this even more amusing and mocked Xiao Huai further, calling him a coward and the Zhao family's lapdog. The irony was lost on Yan Kai and his lackey, who failed to see that they were in the exact same position. However, their arrogance was short-lived. A single glob of spit to the face was enough to knock them off their high horses. Despite all their boasting about their strength, but no matter how much Jie Chong wanted to resist, he was still the weaker one here. Yan Kai was the one standing, and he decided a lesson needed to be taught. Without hesitation, he snapped one of Li Bo's arms, ensuring Jie Chang understood the consequences of retaliation. If Jie Chang didn't care about his own well-being, then his friend would suffer in his place. It worked. Jie Chang was furious, but no matter how much rage burned in his eyes, he was powerless to do anything about it. This only made the situation more entertaining for Yan Kai, who was just about to escalate things further. He was confident Instructor Hu wouldn't come to save them, as he had made sure the instructor was occupied beforehand. However, all of Yan Kai's smugness vanished the moment his minion's unconscious body went flying across the field. Shocked to his core, Yan Kai initially thought it was Instructor Hu, but when he turned around, he saw Leang instead. The moment Liang's eyes landed on what had been done to his friend, a furious heat surged through his blood. His aura exploded around him as he made one thing absolutely clear. He was going to knock out every single one of Yan Kai's teeth. Surprisingly, it turned out that Instructor Hu and the sect master had been present the entire time. They had uncovered Yan Kai's scheme early on, but chose not to intervene, seeing it as an ideal opportunity to observe their disciples and uncover their true nature when no one was watching. Despite this, Instructor Hu couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was partly his fault. He believed that if he hadn't been so preoccupied, the entire mess could have been avoided. Earlier that day, after passing the blood step test, he had become overly excited, stopped to celebrate with a drink, and ended up arriving late. Now, because of his delay, things had spiraled out of control. What shocked Instructor Hu the most, however, was Xiao Huai's behavior. He had never expected Xiao Huai to stand by and do nothing while all of this unfolded. Before Instructor Hu could dwell on it further, Master Yang spoke up, clarifying the situation. Having arrived much earlier, Master Yang had witnessed everything and understood why Xiao Huai had frozen. The boy had a good heart, but that was precisely the problem. It had completely immobilized him. This was also the reason Xiao Huai couldn't pass the blood step. A fighter without courage, Master Yang explained, was like a person without breath in their lungs. Now that they had gathered all the necessary information, Instructor Hu suggested they step in and help Liang, especially since he was only on the verge of breaking through the skin barrier. In his current state, there was no way Liang could defeat Yan Kai. However, Master Yang remained still, his eyes fixed on Liang. He noticed that the blood energy coursing through Liang's body was different, fiercer and more intense than anything he had seen from the others. This wasn't just a simple clash. Liang was clearly brewing something within himself. Master Yang decided to let the boy continue. Yan Kai, meanwhile, wasted no time mocking Liang, sneering at what he called a so-called threat. But Liang had no patience for nonsense. What he had issued wasn't a threat. It was a promise, and he had no intention of waiting around. He charged straight at Yan Kai, closing the distance so quickly that even the arrogant fool flinched. Yan Kai hastily barked orders at his goons to handle the situation, but they were no match for Liang. Liang kicked the first attacker aside, dodged a wild punch, and countered with a clean right hook. He then weaved out of the way of a kick from the larger opponent and delivered a punishing blow that knocked the man's teeth out. Liang, however, cared little about these side characters. His real target was Yan Kai, and he was determined to fulfill his promise. Yan Kai, of course, didn't see Liang as a threat. A smug grin played on his lips as he reminded himself that he was at a higher cultivation level than Liang. There was no way, he thought, that some nobody could stand on equal footing with him. The energy dispersing from Liang's body indicated that he was only approaching the skin barrier, a much lesser state than Yan Kai's. That alone should have been enough to scare Liang off, but strangely, it didn't. Not even a little. This threw Yan Kai off balance and he lunged forward, swinging a punch. Leang, however, blocked the punch with ease and retaliated with a kick, followed by a devastating haymaker that sent Yan Kai reeling. Leang didn't stop there. He had made a promise and he was determined to keep it. A brutal uppercut came next, followed by a relentless storm of blows, punches, kicks, and combos that left Yan Kai staggering backward. Each strike chipped away at Yan Kai's false confidence until all that remained was exhaustion. Leang couldn't help but laugh at him. All that talk, only to be beaten down like this. It turned out Yan Kai wasn't so special after all. This realization snapped Yan Kai out of his daze. Being beaten was one thing, but being humiliated by a newbie was something he couldn't stomach. In a desperate move, he whipped out a special item and decided to show some generosity by stabbing Liang straight in the stomach, multiple times, for good measure. As he did so, he taunted Liang, reminding him of his fatherless status. Unfortunately for Yan Kai, Liang was built like a tank. Even with multiple wounds, he remained conscious and mobile. When Yan Kai went for another stab, Liang caught the knife with his bare hand as if it were nothing. Before Yan Kai could process what had happened, Liang hit him with another vicious haymaker, sending Yan Kai's head crashing into the ground with enough force to nearly cave it in. Just like that, the arrogant fool was reduced to a crying mess, scrambling for help. He turned to Xiao Huai, desperately pleading for intervention and babbling about sect rules that prohibited disciples from attacking each other in such a manner. This was ironic, coming from someone who had just done the same thing moments earlier. Xiao Huai seemed to consider stepping in, likely out of concern for his father's safety. But before he could act, Master Yang decided he had seen enough. Master Yang sent his sword flying into the ground, and his commanding voice cut through the tension as he ordered everyone to stop. With the fight halted, he wasted no time declaring that the 6 individuals involved, including Yan Kai, were to be exiled from the sect and never allowed to set foot in the martial hall again. As for Xiao Huai, he was to be sent to the confinement room until Master Yang dealt with him personally. Judging by Xiao Huai's expression, he understood exactly what that meant. Meanwhile, Liang sat frozen. In front of him stood the legendary young Dong Shong. After everything that had just happened, the sheer rage he had unleashed, Leang felt certain that this was the end of his journey in the sect. He had gone too far, done too much. So when Master Yang called his name, Liang bowed his head, expecting the worst. He was ready to be exiled, but to his astonishment, Master Yang was anything but angry. In fact, he was impressed. Instead of punishment, he offered Leang something he never saw coming: a place as his direct disciple. Leang was shocked. For a moment, he thought he had misheard. The backing he so desperately needed, the security he had been scrambling for, had come to him on its own, and not just as any disciple, but as Master Yang's direct disciple. Never in his wildest dreams had he expected this, but it was a welcome surprise indeed. With this, his future in the sect was secure. A few days had passed, and the Yang residence was abuzz with excitement. Rumors had spread that Master Yang had accepted his 9th direct disciple, a handsome young man, no less. Upon hearing this news, the girls in the residence wasted no time. They flocked to his room, bringing him new outfits to try on. Some even boldly offered to help him put them on. However, Leang, not one for such boldness, politely declined. Their laughter as they left suggested they had merely been teasing him, and while the encounter was a bit of a hassle for Leang, he found it worth enduring. 2 weeks had passed since Leang had defeated Yan Kai. Thanks to the medicinal baths provided by the sect, the wounds on his body, as well as those of his friends, had nearly healed. Leang was deeply grateful, not just for the physical healing, but for the sense of belonging it symbolized. He was no longer alone. He had a master, senior brothers and sisters, and a support system. Now it was time to prepare for a counterattack against those from the Xiao Manor. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Yang residence, Senior Hu was practically glowing with excitement as he recounted Liang's story. He spoke at length about how impressive the newcomer was, emphasizing that Leang had defeated someone on the verge of breaking through the skin barrier just a day after joining the sect. By now, however, the others had heard the story so many times that they were growing tired of it. They already knew Leang was exceptional. After all, Master Yang had chosen him at first glance. Zhou Qiqin, the only woman among the direct disciples, easily detected the jealousy hidden in their conversation and called them out on it. To his credit, the 4th disciple didn't even bother denying it. Still, as a senior, it was tradition to gift something to a new junior, and Leang was no exception. Despite his own financial struggles, the 4th disciple managed to gift Leang a piece of tungsten steel arm guard. It wasn't much, but considering his circumstances, it was the best he could do, and honestly, it was more than enough. As if on cue, Leang arrived, sporting a fresh new outfit for the occasion, complete with a new hairstyle. He looked clean and sharp, drawing everyone's attention. Despite the admiration, Leang made sure to greet his seniors with proper respect, which they appreciated. Before they could head to the ceremony, however, the 3rd senior brother realized he hadn't yet given his gift. Seizing the moment, he presented Leang with a fine piece of exquisite crane gold, an incredibly valuable material for crafting weapons. Not only that, he even offered to forge Leang a weapon himself if he ever stopped by his smithy. Leang, of course, expressed his deep gratitude. With the formalities concluded, it was time to head to the ceremony. They couldn't afford to keep their master and mistress waiting. Meanwhile, over at the Xiao Manor, the atmosphere was far grimmer. The steward had arrived bearing bad news. Old Man Zhang's corpse had been found, but the item that was supposed to be inside his stomach had vanished. This was the last thing Xiao wanted to hear. He didn't even let the steward finish before slapping him in a fit of rage. The situation was dire. If that item were exposed, it would cause serious trouble. If the government caught wind of it, Xiao's head would be served on a platter as compensation, a fate the steward certainly didn't want. Desperate to shift the blame, the steward pointed the finger at Leang, arguing that since Old Man Zhang had been sent after Leang and was now dead, it was obvious Leang had killed him and let the item escape. This earned the steward another slap. Xiao was no fool. He had already received news that Leang was now a direct disciple of Yang Dongxiang. If the steward was so eager to test Yang's blade, he was welcome to try, though the steward had no desire to do so. Xiao ordered him to forget about assigning blame and focus on retrieving the missing item immediately. As the steward left, Xiao's anger only deepened. Liang had struck a nerve, and even though he was now under the protection of the Yang sect, Xiao couldn't help but plot ways to get his hands on him. Back at the Yang residence, Liang stood before Master Yang as the ceremony to formally accept him as a disciple began. It started with a simple question, to which Liang gave a firm and resolute acceptance. Master Yang made it clear that being his disciple would not be an easy path. Joining meant staying humble, diligent, and respectful to both the masters and the teachings. Liang was forbidden from fighting among his peers, disrespecting his elders, or committing evil acts. Liang understood all of this and responded with unwavering determination, which delighted the master. With a nod of approval, Master Yang officially declared Liang his 9th direct disciple. He emphasized that under his watch, no one would be able to humiliate or intimidate Liang, as Yang Dongshang himself would stand behind him. Liang accepted this declaration with grace. Not long after, news of Liang's newfound status spread throughout the academy, stirring envy among many. However, any jealousy that arose was quickly overshadowed by the far more satisfying revelation that Yan Kai and his gang had been expelled from the school. Yet one person did not take the news lightly: Xiao Yuan. Upon hearing Liang's name, Xiao Yuan cursed under his breath, seething with resentment. While all of this unfolded, Liang was simply minding his own business, continuing his lessons with Senior Hu. That day, their discussion built upon their previous conversation about the 4 barriers, shifting focus to the 7 paths. Senior Hu explained each realm in detail. In the wild horse realm, a warrior at their peak could restrain dozens of galloping horses without budging. In the wolf smoke realm, blood energy surged like thick black smoke, rising several meters high when fully unleashed, striking fear into those nearby, much like a pack of wolves. In the tiger hunt realm, blood energy boiled like a raging tide, radiating such terrifying force that ordinary people would tremble, feeling as helpless as a rabbit caught in the gaze of a hungry tiger. In the supreme elephant realm, every step could shake the ground. Those who reached this level were said to be capable of collapsing mountains and halting rivers, making them prime candidates to become great generals. In the celestial dragon realm, one transcended ordinary limitations, becoming akin to a divine dragon. Such individuals could leap 3,000 jang in a single bound, soaring among the clouds, and were revered as martial saints of a nation. As for the melting furnace realm and rainbow transformation realm, even Senior Hu admitted that little was known. All he could say was that experts who reached these stages had supposedly ascended beyond mortality itself. This last detail immediately caught Liang's attention. If martial cultivation in this world was truly that powerful, did ascension mean one could return to their previous world? It was an intriguing thought, but he pushed it aside for the moment, not wanting Senior Hu to catch him slacking. Quickly, he asked what level their master had reached. The question brought a chuckle from Senior Hu, who was more than happy to boast about their master's strength. He explained that despite there being 3 martial schools in Pinyang City, the Yang sect remained the most revered. Unlike the other 2 schools, which were confined to Pinyang due to their limited capabilities, Master Yang stayed by choice. Pinyang was his hometown. His martial arts school had been the #1 for years for one simple reason. Master Yang was the only one in Pinyang to have reached the tiger hunt realm. As one might expect, Liang was both surprised and excited by this revelation. With his system, he believed he could reach that level even faster. His excitement was evident on his face, so much so that Senior Hu had to caution him, advising him not to rush. Advancements, he stressed, had to be made step by step, with patience and control. But of course, Liang wasn't exactly listening. His mind was already racing, thinking about the spiritual fish he needed to capture to break through the first barrier and officially become a martial master. With that goal in mind, he wasted no time. The next moment, he was out on the lake, attempting to catch a spirit fish with the help of his pets. Fishing itself was easy, but for some reason he couldn't seem to find what he was looking for. No matter how many fish he caught, they were all just regular fish. His boat was nearly overflowing with them, making him wonder if he needed a bigger vessel. Yet, even after some time had passed, his luck refused to turn around. Not a single spirit fish was in sight. With his synchronization rate already at 37%, he knew that catching just one could help him break through to the skin barrier. However, his train of thought was suddenly interrupted when he noticed a single red feather fluttering in the wind. As his gaze followed it, the atmosphere shifted. The once calm lake grew restless, with unseen currents stirring beneath the surface. Then, without warning, waves surged and crashed violently against his boat. This took Leang by surprise, as such a disturbance had never happened before. He immediately began looking around for answers and quickly realized the source of the chaos. Two giant spirit beasts were locked in combat. A primordial toad had set its sights on a vermilion bird, clearly attempting to turn the majestic creature into its next meal. But the bird had no intention of being eaten. With a furious flap of its wings, it retaliated, sending the massive toad hurtling back into the lake. The impact was so powerful that it created a massive wave, one large enough to shatter Leang's boat into pieces. Thrown into the water, he barely had time to react before the vermilion bird unleashed its next attack, a mental strike that hit him instantly. His vision blurred, his thoughts scrambled, and before he could even resist, his consciousness completely blacked out. Some time later, Leang woke up on solid ground. At first, he was confused, but as he groggily took in his surroundings, he quickly realized what had happened. His pets had saved him yet again, pulling him away from the battlefield before things could get worse. Even so, his mind was still reeling from what he had just witnessed. Those spirit beasts were on a completely different level. Just from their battle alone, the entire weather had shifted. A full-blown tornado now raged in the middle of the lake, created by the sheer force of their clash. If a primordial toad was capable of catching a beast that could create such a vortex, then capturing one himself would be an entirely different challenge. That thought alone made him feel ridiculously small. But that was a concern for the distant future. For now, he still hadn't caught the one fish he actually needed. To make things worse, his boat was destroyed, and all the fish he had caught so far were gone. His progress was completely delayed, which was frustrating to say the least. With a heavy sigh, he decided to take a break before his irritation got the best of him. Just as he was about to resign himself to his bad luck, something unexpected happened. His lazy crocodile, who was usually too sluggish to be of any use, had actually come through when it mattered most. While Leang had been knocked out, it had somehow managed to catch a spirit fish. And just like that, things weren't so bad after all. With this, he could finally break through the skin barrier and grow stronger. Leang went straight to his house and immediately began cultivating blood energy. Blood energy, he reflected, was a manifestation of a martial artist's physical strength. However, possessing strong blood energy alone did not equate to power. Rather, it was because their physical constitution was robust enough that they could condense sufficient blood energy. Blood energy was not the cause of strength, but the result. Yet, this result, in turn, reinforced the cause, creating a positive cycle that grew endlessly. With Senior Hu's guidance and the resources provided, Leang felt confident in his ability to progress. This confidence was further bolstered after he received a concentration incense, a rare aid that helped martial artists break through their gates more easily. The key to breaking through the Pi Gate and becoming a martial artist lay in tempering the blood energy in the chest. Each time Leang trained his blood energy, he replenished it with fish meat. Despite this, After 38 attempts, he still felt he was just a little short of achieving his goal. It was then that he recalled another piece of advice from Senior Hu. Another key to breaking through the Pi Gate was to use qi and blood inner force to stimulate the body's fascia and skin, achieving the effect of skin refinement. Qi and blood referred to the energy one felt in their chest when practicing martial arts. It was the essence condensed by the human body, the very root of life. When a martial artist could sense a warm current flowing from their chest, merging with their blood energy, this qi would begin to move. It would spread toward the limbs and bones, and finally, when it reached the fascia and skin, it would transform into a surge of heat. That was skin refinement. Indeed, Leang could feel that he was close, but unfortunately, it still wasn't enough. This was already his 40th attempt, and he was still a little short. Frustrated, he turned to his system for answers. There, he noticed that his synchronization was only at 49%. It seemed logical to assume that once he hit 50%, something major would change within him, allowing him to finally reach the next stage of his cultivation. However, raising his synchronization now was easier said than done. The fish meat he had stored was already gone, and the lotus roots barely had any effect on him anymore. It appeared he had no choice but to head back down and catch another mystic fish. To his surprise, Leang had taken much longer than expected, and by the time he realized it, morning had already arrived. Before he could even get out of bed, someone was knocking on his door. It turned out to be Giachang and Libo's fathers. Since they had seen him come home late the night before, they wanted to ask if he had seen their sons. Apparently, the two hadn't been home for 2 days, and their parents were starting to get worried. They weren't sure if their kids were still at the Martial Hall or if they had wandered off somewhere, messing around again. Leang reassured them, explaining that there was no need to worry. The three of them had performed well and caught the attention of the martial instructors, who had specifically set aside a room for them in the courtyard. As a result, they had been staying there, focusing on their training. As one might expect, their fathers were both delighted and proud. It truly sounded like their sons, and it seemed like Yi Shixing City had produced a few martial artists after all. This wasn't much of a surprise, as everyone had watched these kids grow up together and had always known they would achieve something big one day. Leang kept his smile on but didn't reveal the whole truth. The real reason Jichang and Libo hadn't returned with him was that they were too scared to go back. Their injuries hadn't fully healed yet, and they didn't want their parents to worry for nothing. With that matter settled, the uncles revealed another reason for their visit. They had come to remind Leang that the village was organizing another river god sacrificial ceremony. This caught Leang by surprise. He definitely remembered this custom, but they had already held one just 3 months ago. Normally, the next ceremony shouldn't have been for another year. However, this time was different. According to the villagers, the river god had shown a divine sign the previous day. The river god had leaped out of the water and caught a flaming giant bird that had shattered the sky. The moment Leang heard this, he immediately realized what they were talking about: the river-eating toad. He had seen it, and it truly had been an epic sight. Instead of refuting their claims, he simply promised to contribute some money and take part when the time came. This was all the uncles needed to hear, as they were already running low on offerings and needed all the help they could get. Satisfied, they left. A little while later, Leang continued his training inside the Lotus Cave, going all out against his 2 beasts. Previously, he could barely win against just one, but now he was fighting both at once, effortlessly maneuvering through the water. This improvement was thanks to the increase in his fusion level. Moreover, the force of the water flow he could control was approximately 150 kilo, which could be compressed into 10 liters of water to be unleashed. This meant each liter was equivalent to 15 kilos of force. At this point, his strength underwater had already surpassed the Pi Gate. If he had to guess, He could probably take on 4 Yankai with ease. With this level of control, he could even form a water blade inside the water itself. However, it was still a work in progress, as it wasn't strong enough to do anything to his pets yet. If only he had a weapon suited for it, then it would definitely become a formidable technique. Speaking of weapons, Leang suddenly remembered what his third senior brother had mentioned. This world had a special kind of weapon called a spirit weapon. These weapons could self-repair and even level up over time. However, forging one wasn't easy. Their cores required rare heavenly materials and earthly treasures, making it almost impossible for him to acquire one right now, or so he thought. Just then, his pet Chunky sensed something hot, even in the water below. Without hesitation, Leang turned to investigate, following Chunky's lead. Soon, he discovered an item buried beneath the rubble, still bubbling with energy. To his surprise, it was a feather, the very same vermilion bird feather from the other day. Just from its aura alone, it was obvious this wasn't ordinary. It looked special, and this might just be the very thing he had been looking for. Since Leang was already planning to visit his third senior brother to select a weapon, he decided to bring the feather along and inquire about it as well. A short while later, Leang arrived at Pingyang County. As usual, the area was vibrant and bustling with activity. However, before he could reach his brother's smithy, something unusual caught his attention. A thick column of black smoke rising in the distance. It appeared to be coming from somewhere near Pingyang County. This was not a common sight, so Leang made a mental note to ask his brother about it later. Upon arriving at the smithy, however, Leang completely forgot about the smoke, as the item he carried was far more important. Just as he had anticipated, his brother immediately recognized it. The feather was a real treasure known as the Crimson Fire Molt Feather. His brother was so impressed by the find that he didn't hesitate to congratulate Leang. This feather was no ordinary material. It originated from the Crimson Firebird, a rare spirit creature. When faced with a life-threatening danger, the Firebird would inject all of its life essence into a single feather before scattering its plumage in all directions, allowing it to escape. Among these feathers, one would always contain the most life essence, known as the Scarlet Fire Gold Feather. Using this feather, the bird could undergo rebirth, similar to how a lizard sheds its tail. Except in this case, the Firebird would abandon its entire body. Leang's eyes sparkled with excitement upon hearing this news. However, just as he was about to celebrate, his senior brother clarified that what Leang had found was not the legendary golden feather, but merely a remnant. Though it was still a great discovery, this clarification instantly deflated Leang's enthusiasm. His brother had initially hyped him up, only to reveal that the feather was not as extraordinary as he had thought. Nevertheless, Leang wasn't overly disappointed. The feather could still be used to forge a spiritual weapon, which was exactly what he needed at the moment. Reflecting on his recent battle with the stone crab, Leang had already decided on the type of weapon he wanted: a polearm. He believed it would work best underwater and complement his self-created techniques. Without hesitation, he confidently chose a spear. This decision surprised his senior brother, as spears were quite rare in their school. While longer weapons offered the advantage of reach, they were also harder to control. Despite this, Leang remained firm in his choice. He knew exactly what he needed, and his unique fighting style demanded something unconventional. Seeing his resolve, his senior brother didn't question him further and agreed to forge the spear. Leang was grateful for his brother's assistance, though he understood that crafting a weapon wasn't an instant process. He would have to wait a few days for it to be completed. Just before leaving, however, something caught his eye again, the same ominous column of thick smoke rising in the distance. Instinctively, he turned to his brother and asked about it. The mood shifted instantly. His brother's face darkened, and his anger boiled over to the point where he cracked the table he was holding. The smoke, he explained, was coming from Manhwa Temple. A massive fire had broken out that morning, and amidst the flames, something terrifying had emerged, a mountain demon straight out of a nightmare. Hours before the chaos unfolded, on the outskirts of Manhwa Temple, a woman was seen running frantically toward the temple. Her tattered clothes and bruised body made it evident that she had endured unimaginable suffering. Despite her advanced pregnancy, she pressed on, driven by sheer fear. The moment she spotted someone and attempted to cry for help, her body gave out, and she collapsed on the spot. Fortunately, her desperate efforts were not in vain, as the people at the temple took her in and cared for her. However, when she regained consciousness, it was clear they demanded answers. How had she ended up in such a dire state? Out of gratitude, the woman explained her ordeal. She revealed that she was originally from Hwaju County. 3 months prior, she had traveled to Pingyang County to visit her relatives. However, her journey took a horrific turn when she encountered a group of sinister-looking bandits. They blindfolded her and dragged her to an unknown location, a place she described as nothing short of hell. The people there had been tortured and broken, stripped of their humanity and transformed into something unrecognizable. She lamented that being kidnapped for ransom would have been preferable to the fate she endured. Instead, the bandits sought something far more sinister. They intended to refine her into a pill. Meanwhile, in the very hellhole she described, a ritual was underway. A large group of robed figures focused their energy on runes carved into the body of a sacrificial victim, causing the victim's body to swell grotesquely. Once enough energy had been gathered, a man referred to as the Great Superior stepped forward, wielding a horrifying knife. He plunged the blade into the victim, and from the gruesome act emerged the very thing they sought, a twisted, monstrous pill. This abomination, a fusion of pure evil and the flesh of the sacrifice, was something only a mind steeped in insanity could conceive. Even some of the newer followers began to question what they were witnessing, their confusion palpable. Who could blame them? One of the senior members took it upon himself to explain the ritual, his tone carrying a mix of reverence and horror. He revealed that this was a forbidden pill known as the fetal pearl pill. The sacrificial victim was first forced to consume a broth brewed from the flesh of a mountain spirit. It didn't matter whether the victim was male or female. Once they drank the broth, their belly would swell, nurturing a grotesque mass of flesh inside them. After 3 months, this mass would mature into a fetal pill, which could then be harvested and refined into a fetal pearl pill. It was said that consuming such a pill would grant immortality. However, if the mass was not extracted within the 3-month period, it would hatch, and what emerged from it was something even the most seasoned members of the group refused to imagine. Back at Manhwa Temple, the older monk had gone to the city to inform the authorities about the woman's harrowing story. In his absence, the younger monk was tasked with bringing her food. As he entered the room, an eerie silence hung in the air. He noticed the woman's silhouette lying on the bed and assumed she had fallen asleep, which seemed reasonable given her ordeal. He was about to set the food down on the table when he suddenly stepped into something sticky. At first, he was confused, but the sharp metallic scent that filled his nose soon made it clear. It was blood, and it was fresh. When he turned toward the source, he froze in terror. All that remained of the woman was her lower half. His instincts screamed at him to flee, but his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Desperate to make sense of the scene, he turned his gaze back to the bed, only to find the woman's lifeless upper half lying there. Just as he was about to run, another drop of blood splattered onto his head. Confused, he looked up, and immediately wished he hadn't. Perched above him was the ugliest, most horrifying creature he had ever seen. It was a monstrous baby,